It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Okay, so what do we want to talk about? R.Kelly. We all saw in the news this week, because it was pretty prominent in the news, that he was convicted on these state charges in the state of New York, all kinds of sexual abuse charges of underage girls. Sentencing is like 10 to 100 years. So Mr. Kelly has not had a good week. We can say that for sure. Okay. Now, my personal involvement with the R.Kelly situation comes about way back. Okay, way back. It was around 2002. In early 2002, that it became public that there was this R.Kelly sex tape that was released through the Chicago Sun-Times. And I remember when I heard that this tape was released, and I heard the details of the tape, I was shocked because the actual activity on the tape is not just an R.Kelly sex tape, as we had heard the rumors floating around. This was actually a child molestation tape where he had taped himself urinating into the mouth of a child, little 13-year-old girl. So this was early in 2002. This tape came out and hit the Chicago Sun-Times. Now, my involvement with this tape came in early 2001, almost a year earlier. And people I know and people that I worked with at the time had contacted me and said, "Hey, Ed, have you heard about this R. Kelly sex tape?" And I says, "No, I haven't. What do you got? What's going on?" He says, "Well, there's some people calling around and they're shopping around this R. Kelly sex tape. And we've seen screenshots and still shots, and it sure looks like R. Kelly's face with the beard and the sunglasses. It sure seems to be him." So what my involvement in my role in this, to go back a little further back, right around this time, see, back in the late 90s, during the time of the Scott Peterson case, I was hired by some people surrounding that case to do some internet investigations to locate and identify people from their internet postings and from their email address and from anonymous websites. And I was very successful in that. And what happened was that some of the attorneys in that case, if you recall, some of their names involved with that case, heard about my work in that, and they were all impressed with it. So they were giving a lot of recommendations. They were sending a lot of referrals to me. Okay. Now, some of the attorneys in that case I've worked with after that, and some I have not. That was my involvement with the Scott Peterson case. I know a lot of people seem to think that, I worked for the prosecution, I worked for the defense. No, not at all. Okay, but I was recommended. I was given referrals and recommendations by Mark Garagos, even though I had never worked for him directly. Somehow he became aware of my work. But others, all the other attorneys in that situation too, was aware of the work I did in the Scott Peterson case, tracing emails, locating, identifying people from an email address, locating people from an online website, being able to get my way behind a secret paywall, where people only like the elites in these communications are allowed to go behind and communicate. I was able to pull that off. Okay, and there was other cases I had worked on too. Same kind of situation. Back in those days, I was doing a lot of email work. So I was contacted and I was told, "Hey, Ed, there's these people out there, and they're shopping around this R. Kelly sex tape. All we have for them is a phone number and an email address and an IP address. What can you do? Can you locate these people? Can you identify these people? So I'd done some preliminary work on this, and I was able to narrow it down that they were in the Chicago area and at a location that was significant, that indicated that they would have, that it was possible that they would have access to this kind of inside information at R.Kelly's address. That they somehow would have access to R.Kelly's information. This wasn't some off-the-wall person contacting us from Hawaii or overseas trying to make wild claims. We were able to connect it to people that had a legitimate connection to the R.Kelly situation and his employment and his living situation. But once again, we were totally unaware that this was a sex tape of an underage girl. And it seemed like there were two paths of negotiation going on here, is what I can tell you. One was that there was this offer of this sex tape to the tabloids to market this tape and see what it was worth to embarrass Mr. Kelly in the public air in tabloid publications with this salacious kind of material. But there was another avenue of monetizing this tape that seemed to be contacting people around R. Kelly and his management and his different people who were making money off of him, people who had an interest to lose should this tape be exposed, like a blackmail type situation. Okay, so we were aware of these two levels of negotiation going on with these tapes. And then what I think happened was, because the tapes did ultimately wind up anonymously at the offices of the Chicago Sun-Times. So what I think happened was, and just my experience and my personal expertise in this area, was that the people who were trying to blackmail had gotten too far along in the process. And for the drop, the money drop, the negotiation for the money split was getting, when it got to that stage of the negotiation, that they says, okay, I'll give you some identifying information about myself. You can transfer this money. And that's when all hell broke loose. And the hammer came down on them, and they were told, hey, listen, this is a crime. This is extortion. This is blackmail. And they said, oh, no. And they turned it over for free to the Chicago Sun-Times rather than risk prosecution in seeking any kind of monetary gain from these embarrassing tapes, because it's illegal. Okay, most people have heard of extortion and blackmail, but even to release to threaten to release embarrassing information about someone is a violation of those blackmail extortion laws. So that's something to be considered. So this is way, way, way back in 2002. Everyone knew about this tape. People out there knew about this tape. Okay, like people in the media knew about it. People in the music industry knew about it. People in the legal community knew about it, and other people who are familiar with brokering these kind of tapes and this kind of information was aware of this. There was an investigation, and I believe he got off scot-free on that. So 2002 was a very bad year for Mr. R. Kelly. And I believe he was arrested for counts of possession of child pornography, both in Florida and Chicago. Images, and some of the images were related to the young lady that was on this tape. And then the story goes, and I believe this is even in some of these documentary films. I've only seen one, and that was the one recently, the Netflix series that starts out where it talks about how... poor R. Kelly. I guess his name is Richard. Oh, poor Richard. Oh, he was abused as a child too. So was I. Our whole family were all being abused. As little kids, trying to gather sympathy for R. Kelly, which I have none. I have none. It's a tragedy when anyone's a victim of this type of crime, but his level of abuse and brainwashing and intimidation and blackmail and bribery and all that went on here is way beyond a victim of abuse who maybe grows up and has a moment of weakness, and just regrets it for the rest of their life. Different type of situation. This guy was systematically abused young girls. We hear now from the reporter from the Sun-Times that he's aware of 50 cases, 50 young ladies who were abused by R.Kelly. But those charges in 2002 were there was a problem with a search warrant. Those charges were dropped. And then the witness, the victim in the case, refused to testify, so those charges were dropped. No, not dropped, but the case fell apart, as we like to say. So that's what happened way back then, way back in 2002. There's some rumors going on. I believe it was even in one of the documentaries that he had some family members who were, shoveling money around for people. Then it was another series of incidents that I wasn't involved in. But before we get to that, before I forget, when I first became aware of the sex tape in 2001, the people who were guiding me in this and retained me in this job were bringing me up to speed. And that's where I heard the whole story about this Aaliyah, this young girl, and Aaliyah, who actually married R.Kelly when she was, I believe, she was 15 years old. He had met her when she was 12 years old, okay? And then he married her when she was 15, and she was provided some kind of fake ID to say that she was 18. And I believe she was provided this fake ID by someone on his own management team. People that worked for him, around him, provided him this fake ID. So this is the kind of situation where the people were unaware of what R. Kelly was up to. When I became aware of this, over this, what was told to me was a sex tape, which I assumed was adults. But then I started hearing the story about how he married this little teenage girl, 15 years old, with fake ID, and he had met her when she was 12. And there's a video of him talking about her before they got married, that she was 14 years old, and he acknowledges that he knew that she was 14. Then the guy married a 15-year-old girl. Now this girl, Aaliyah, it turns out she dies later on. She was dating Damon Dash, who you might be familiar with. He was a very rich guy, and is involved in all kinds of stuff, all kinds of there's a couple of movies out there about this guy. Okay, and she was down there, I believe, in the Bahamas, in a Caribbean island, and they all piled onto this little puddle jumper plane. The plane couldn't even take off. It was so overloaded. And it crashes, and she dies. Again, at a very young age. But going back now, after I became aware of this now, there was all kinds of interviews and video footage of Aaliyah and R. Kelly together at interviews, and people, you could just see their body language and stuff. It was just very bizarre. This was like an open secret that everyone knew what was going on, okay, which is very similar to a case we just had recently against, we had that lawsuit against against Disney and that country music producer. There was an open secret. Everybody knew what was going on. A case that I just worked on the past couple of years. So the whole thing with Aaliyah, he married an underage girl and was provided this fake ID by a member of his staff, and was introduced to this young girl at 12 years old by, I believe, her uncle, or a relative of hers, at least. So one of the important things to understand is that people were aware about this. People in the business of buying and selling this type of information were aware of R. Kelly's contact way back as far as 1994. Now, one thing to keep in mind in all this, and this is actually was on film. Okay, after it came out, all this business about the sex cult and how he was brainwashing these young girls, and by now it was just common knowledge that people were coming out and family members were coming out and making allegations. They couldn't get in touch with their daughters. Their daughters were estranged from their family. The girls were coming out and doing statements for TMZ and stuff like that. And obviously they were being coached and recorded phone calls and lawyers' offices, all this kind of stuff you can see on these documentaries. But one thing that goes unremarked about these documentaries in this period of time now is that when the family of one of these young girls, okay, went to Trump Tower in Chicago, because R. Kelly was living in Trump Tower, okay, and you might want to look up a previous show